Have you ever noticed that there are certain people you spend time with, and afterward, something just feels different? Nothing bad happened, nobody argued, nobody offended you. In fact, it seemed like a completely normal conversation. But later that day, your mind felt unusually heavy. Your desire to pray wasn't the same. The peace you had before suddenly disappeared. You couldn't explain it. Have you ever experienced that? Then there are other people. After talking with them, your faith feels stronger. They don't just encourage you, they remind you of God. So why does one conversation leave you spiritually refreshed, while another quietly drains you? Could it simply be personality, or could there be something deeper happening that you've never considered? Here's what many Christians don't realize. The enemy doesn't always begin by attacking your faith directly. Sometimes he begins by influencing the voices you trust the most, because if he can influence what you're constantly hearing, he can slowly influence the direction of your life. That's why some of the greatest spiritual downfalls in the Bible didn't begin with an obvious enemy. Before Samson lost his strength, there was Delilah. Before Amnon ruined his future, there was Jonadab. Before Rehoboam divided a kingdom, he listened to the wrong voices. These weren't strangers. They were people they trusted. So here's the question I want you to think about as we continue. Could someone be influencing your walk with God in ways neither of you even realizes? Because before the enemy attacks your actions, he often tries to influence your thinking. And that influence usually comes through someone close. One of Satan's greatest strategies has never been to force people into sin. It's to slowly change the voices they trust. Think about that. If the enemy can influence the people influencing you, he doesn't have to fight you directly. That's exactly why this battle is so dangerous. Most believers are watching for obvious attacks. They're praying against sickness. They're praying against financial hardship. They're praying against open temptation. But very few are praying for discernment about the people speaking into their lives every single day. And that's where the battle often begins. Notice something remarkable throughout the Bible. The enemy rarely started by attacking God's people head-on. Instead, he often worked through influence. Take Samson. People usually remember Delilah because she cut his hair. But Samson didn't lose his strength the moment his hair was cut. He lost it long before that. He first became comfortable trusting someone who repeatedly tried to discover the source of his strength. Imagine that. The warning signs were already there. She kept asking the same question. She kept testing him. She kept pushing his boundaries. Yet Samson stayed. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't what someone does to you, it's what you continue to ignore. Now consider another story that many Christians overlook. Amnon and Jonadab. The Bible describes Jonadab as a very crafty man. When Amnon struggled with sinful desire, Jonadab didn't encourage him toward righteousness. He encouraged him toward deception. One conversation, one suggestion, one ungodly idea, and it destroyed an entire family. That's the frightening power of influence. Not because Jonadab forced Amnon to sin, but because he gave sinful thoughts a place to grow. James 1:14-15 explains this process so clearly. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Notice the progression. Desire, then temptation, then sin, then destruction. It almost never starts with destruction. It starts with influence. So how do you know if a friendship is quietly affecting your walk with God? The first sign is this. You leave their presence spiritually weaker instead of stronger. Think about the people closest to you. After spending time with them, do you feel encouraged to seek God? Or do you feel distracted, spiritually drained, and strangely distant from Him? Proverbs 13:20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." Every relationship is shaping someone. The question is, what is it shaping in you? The second sign is even more subtle. Compromise starts feeling normal. The jokes that once bothered your conscience don't seem like a big deal anymore. The convictions you once held tightly begin to fade. You don't drift away from God overnight. It happens one small compromise at a time. That's why influence is so powerful. It changes what feels acceptable long before it changes your actions. And finally, the third sign. You begin valuing their approval more than God's. Have you ever stayed silent about your faith because you didn't want to seem too spiritual? Have you ever laughed at something you knew dishonored God simply because everyone else was laughing? That's a warning sign. Because when someone's opinion becomes louder than God's conviction, your heart is already being pulled in a different direction. So ask yourself this: who is helping me become more like Christ? And who is quietly pulling me away from Him? Because not every friendship destroys your faith overnight. Sometimes, it happens so gradually that you don't even notice it until your passion for God begins to disappear. And that's why the Bible doesn't just warn us about the wrong influences, it also shows us what godly friendships are meant to look like. So what should you do if this message is making you think about certain friendships? The answer isn't fear. The answer is discernment. God never calls us to become suspicious of everyone around us. He calls us to become wise. Think about Abraham and Lot. They weren't enemies. They loved each other. But eventually, their paths had to separate, because where God was leading Abraham required a different direction. Not every friendship ends because someone is evil. Sometimes, people are only meant to walk with you for a season. Another example is Demas. Paul once called him a fellow worker in the ministry. Yet later, Paul wrote these heartbreaking words: "Demas, because he loved this present world, has deserted me." 2 Timothy 4:10. That reminds us that not everyone who starts the journey with us will finish it. And that's okay. Here's what I don't want you to do after watching this video. Don't go looking for enemies. Don't assume every friend has bad intentions. Jesus loved people deeply. He ate with sinners. He showed compassion to those who were far from God. But he never allowed anyone, even those closest to him, to pull him away from his Father's will. That's the lesson. So instead of asking, which of my friends is the problem, ask a better question. Who is helping me become more like Christ? Who encourages your faith? Who reminds you of God's promises? Who lovingly corrects you when you're drifting? Those are the relationships worth protecting. So today, don't simply ask God to bless your friendships. Ask Him for discernment. Pray that He surrounds you with people who sharpen your faith, strengthen your character, and continually point you toward Christ. And if this message has spoken to your heart, take a moment to pray this in the comments. Lord, surround me with friends who lead me closer to you, and give me wisdom to recognize every influence that pulls me away, because one godly friendship can strengthen your walk with God, and one unhealthy influence, if left unchecked, can quietly lead you in the wrong direction. If this video encouraged you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. You never know who might need this message today.